Here we are, back with the terrors. I know it does sound like terrorists, but it's not. We are spending our afternoon contemplating the beauty of baptism this afternoon. Another way of thinking of it on our adventures in grace, the drenching of our souls, our spirits, our lives, our world in God's love, and our own acknowledgement of that. So, guys, tell me what you think. What does baptism mean to you?
And why do we use the word drenched?
Yeah,
to,
why?
Manifest that in the world. I'm just throwing the question out.
Come on, I thought you were going to answer for us.
So, in some ways, I hate to start this way, but I guess I with the religious ritual. There's a lot of churches that have a baptismal font that's like this big, and a little shell, and you pour a little bit of water
Note
over the
to self
kids.
for those on a podcast, he just showed a small dinner plate size.
You're right.
Just
thanks.
FYI.
Thank you. So, to me, that says a little bit of water. And then I think of our experience here at Holy Family, in which we open up our 4-foot font in the center of our aisle at the Easter Vigil, and we take adults and we totally immerse them into this 4-foot font, completely immerse them 3 times, which was the original idea of baptism, immersion. John Sanigan, a priest friend of mine, said it's like a pickling process. You put something into a liquid and it transforms it, It's a really, I love that, And so we institutionally, we had this little thing where you pour a little bit of water, and then this concept of jumping in, diving in, and I'm just going to the word drenched, which I'm pretty sure was either one of you came up with it. It's just, it's so much bigger. It's so much richer. To drench something is not to sprinkle or to drop. We're not talking about drops or sprinkles. We're talking about drenching. And that's the love, the grace, the sacrament that is available in this experience. Therefore, we have the sacrament of baptism. So that's just my little take.
Well, here's the danger. If you let me talk about baptism, I could go off for quite some time.
Sure.
So bear with me. It's a 20-year investment. For those people unfamiliar, we started the Beloved Retreat with a group of people at Old St. Pat's, La amongst them, and it's been a severe blessing over the course of these 20 years. So I've been marinating in this notion of baptism for a long time. And maybe I could start contemporarily. My son and daughter-in-law had planned to baptize our second grandchild, Quinn Carey Nelson Johnson, who is 2 months old today. And the baptism was going to take place over Labor Day. And because of this new emergence of COVID and travel and what have you, they would have to come in from out of town. They decided to delay it. And in talking to my wife, my son said, makes me a little nervous, to not get him baptized sooner rather than later. But if I could be honest with you, Mom, I think that notion of, he's in jeopardy until he gets baptized, or is not loved till he's baptized, is bullshit. And my wife's like, I completely agree with you.
I love that woman.
And I agree, and with a counterpoint. And Terry does such a good job of honoring the rituals of the church while not being at the mercy of the rituals of the church. And so it seems to me that the ritual baptism celebrates the soul of baptism. Like, it recognizes what's already taken place, which is Quinn Carey Nelson Johnson is the target of the affection of the divine today, tomorrow, and deep into his future in ways that we can't even fathom. What the ritual does is to celebrate that and bring attention to that. So one of the ways I talk about baptism is we are baptized to the extent that we know ourselves as desperately, ridiculously, recklessly, fiercely, tenderly, irrevocably loved by the author of love. That's what, for me, that's what baptism is. And it's a verb, and it continues to unfold, and it's a 10,000-layer mystery. So I pray, God, that I'll know myself baptized more deeply 6 months from now than I do now, and it just continues to unfold. So I brought two things, and those people on podcasts will not be able to see them, but one of them is this. I have a sculpture, and I bought this sculpture from my mom when I was 16. And I took stuff from my brother's room, unbeknownst to him because he was in college, and I went to a pawn shop, and I pawned my brother's stuff in order to get money to buy the sculpture for my mom. We have one sacramental blocking
Competing with
another.
I hate it when that happens.
I hate it when that happens. And so as a 16-year-old, I knew that this was the relationship I had with my mom. And I think the reason that I have such a passion for the Beloved Retreat is because of this. When I was a really little kid, my parents moved to a new neighborhood, and it was a small neighborhood, and they had a neighborhood newspaper. And so a young little journalist gal came out to interview my mom, and she had all her questions, where are you coming from, and how did you happen to move to Palatine, and blah, blah, blah. Plum Grove, actually. And she got to the question. My mom thought she was doing swimmingly, and they got to the question of, like, Mrs. Johnson, what are your hobbies? And my mom was completely flummoxed. And she got a little flustered, and she assumed, and the young girl just assumed that, of course, you have hobbies, because people have hobbies. Yeah. And then my mom looked so, like, lost that the girl tried to help her. Knitting, bridge, gardening. And my mom continued to almost look scared, And my mom was like, and my mom is not one to lie. So she's like, no. Golf, like, no. Sports, like, no. And then the woman just mercifully, like, we'll move on to the next question. What kind of car do you drive, Mrs. Johnson? And blah, blah, blah. So pasta and my mom was good at all the other ones. But the no hobby really bothered her, because the girl gave her the impression that, like, women who move into Palatine and Plum Grove have hobbies. And and my mom's like, geez, maybe I should get a hobby. So it was the middle of the night. She woke up. She's like, and she gets up early in the morning. Is Sarah there? She calls the newspaper, just hoping that it hasn't been published. It's like, Sarah, I found I know what my hobbies are. It's like, oh, good, Mrs. Johnson. I'm sure I can edit the story. And the mom says, my children are my hobbies.
Of course she did. Of course she did.
Your hobbies are those things that you turn to when you have free time, and it's what you want to do the most. And it's where you spend your time and your energy left to your own devices. And when no one's telling you what you have to do. And I was my mom's hobby. I was what she wanted to do. And I think my conviction, my soul conviction that I'm baptized is the product of having a mom who thought of me as her hobby. And so I can stand in front of other people and proclaim and preach that our destiny is to be baptized. And I know that all human beings are not, didn't have the blessing of having moms that had the time or the resources or the freedom or the interior sense to make their kids their hobbies. And so I feel like one of my vocations is to let everyone know that they are God's hobby. That you're all God's hobby. That when God has extra time and gets to do whatever God wants to do, what God does is want to hang out with you and get in the carpet and play and wrestle and remind you who you are, which is desperately, desperately, desperately loved. And there's a reason that baptism is the portal sacrament. Because if baptism doesn't take, you can do all the rituals you want. It's not a magic show. All the rituals come back and refract themselves through baptism. Mm-hmm. There's a reason that baptism starts this whole thing.
Yes.
Because our primal identity, and it's what allows us to believe that the whole thing's a gift and not an accident. And Rohr says, if you get the who right, all the whats will take care of themselves. If you get the who right. And ultimately, the Christian imagination suggests that the who is we're baptized. And in the scriptural proclamation of Jesus' baptism, it says, as all the people were being baptized, Jesus was likewise baptized. The word likewise is crucial because what it suggests is we're all baptized. Like, to your point, Jesus didn't get drenched and we got trickled, because we're on the JV. Jesus is the baptismal varsity. Like, no. Jesus does not want to have Jesus wants to bring us to the water and drench us. And so while all the people were being baptized, and then it says, and Jesus was praying, everyone was likewise baptized. So it seems to me that Jesus is praying that we all might know ourselves as equally drenched as he, and that we find ourselves in some ultimate water park, splashing with each other in a wave pool, and just having that sense of like, oh, this is something. This is beautiful. So, baptism, essential, and it's not something, the certificate's not what we're talking about. What I often invite people to do is to bring their baptismal certificate to the Beloved Retreat, and then rather than turn it in, ask them to eat it. You know what I'm saying?
No. Say more.
Ingest your baptismal certificate. Become your baptismal certificate.
Yeah.
It's not something that happened at St. Andrews in 1956. Yeah. It's something that I'm invited to come to know again today, every time I take a shower, every time. Yeah.
So when I think baptism, I go back to the River Jordan. It was 5 years ago that Mom and I made that pilgrimage that I mentioned to you guys earlier. And as our bus pulled up, it was about 103 that day. We were there in July and August. Maybe not the best travel time. But listen to the sign. I've got a picture of it on my phone. It says baptismal site. Please respect the site and obey the following rules. And then there are, many rules, like heed the instructions of the Israel Nature and Parks Authority. You're traversing a military zone. Do not cross fences due to fears of landmines. I'll stop there. To enter into baptism means, as an adult, we're traversing a military zone. Do not cross due to fear of landmines. It's a huge risk to allow ourselves to believe, even for a minute, that we take God's breath away. Seriously. Just let that sink in for a minute. You and me, take God's breath away. And that's a big risk. And go to the River Jordan and stand at the water's edge where Jesus was baptized by his cousin, who later lost his life. And remember that we're in the midst of a military zone and we have an opportunity to trust love. I can't think of anything more important in 2021, after COVID, in the midst of COVID, and all that's going on in our country, that we might not learn anything more than that we can trust love when we allow ourselves to be drenched.
Very rich. Thank you.
Very beautiful.
And it's added about 4 layers to what I want to say. I just love this, the scene of Jesus approaching. John the Baptist is using water because it's such a sign of life to get people to make a commitment to prepare themselves for the coming of Christ. Jesus approaches, and John is completely confounded. Wait a second. This is the whole purpose. So entering into my life is the whole focus of my life. And I'm sharing this ritual with people in this river. It's a small, dirty river. And most rivers are. It is life. Life is dirty. Life is a dirty river. But life, the river of life carries so much nutrients, so much, it's such a source of life. Jesus doesn't have to, but he chooses to walk into the river of our lives, of human life, to immerse himself into the dirty river of human life to say, I'm one of you. And John is like, wait a second, I shouldn't be baptizing you. You should be baptizing me. At the beginning of his public ministry and at the end of his public ministry, he makes 2 phenomenal human statements. He suffers like us, and at the beginning, he walks into life to say, I'm one of you. One of the messages in his suffering in the cross is, I'm one of you. I'm suffering like you will suffer. I'm fully human and I'm suffering. I'm fully human and I'm walking into this dirty river with you, the river of human life. And that statement is, I have a picture of myself in the Jordan River, like up to my knees, renewing my baptismal promises. It's one of my favorite pictures.
Most sacramental pictures.
Yeah. And I have for a while I did this, we called it a man's retreat. It was always a sports themed retreat. And one of the retreat themes was when Michael Jordan went from basketball to baseball. And the theme of the retreat was, it's time for a change. And I have the it's time for a change shirt on. I'm standing in the Jordan River. I mean, the 2 parts of that coming together were just absolutely phenomenal. I love this picture, and I'm going to have to get it so you can put it up. So that whole idea of immersing and walking into life, the river, also makes me the connection with my mom and every one of our moms. We were immersed in water in our mother's womb for 9 months. We couldn't separate life from that water. And to me, that often, I sometimes I just think of my mom, and I for many reasons, my mom was just she was so kind and so gentle and so funny and so compassionate. She was a nurse. Mm. And sometimes when I think about that experience of being immersed in her womb and fundamentally my life like beginning there, it's like that's what baptism is about. That's the life of the water. And then there's so many other elements of water that we can talk about that it's so powerful because it gives life. Yeah. all water is holy because wherever there's water, there's life.
Amen.
Amen.
That's why it's a portal sacrament too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the portal on the boat, right?
Exactly.
Other image I think of that's central to me in terms of contemplating baptism is to be held. So water and being held. So you get drenched and refreshed and cleaned and just to take a little detour to the river. As I understand it, originally it was part of the expectation of the ritual is that you were baptized in flowing water. And the part of the understanding of the flowing water was that whatever was keeping you from knowing yourself as deeply enmeshed with the life of God or baptized or drenched, anything that was preventing you from knowing yourself as that was carried downriver. So that when you emerged on the other side of the river, you went in naked. You dropped the cloth, got into the river naked, and emerged on the other side to be clothed in new clothing. And you were new. I shall make all things new. And so there's this merciful part of baptism too. Like, is anything preventing you from knowing this? We're going to take care of that in this action. So then this idea of being held, and it's so iconic for me and so close to the heart of baptism because, when you hold a kid and the kid is colicky and then you just sort of, your body just starts to move and you're soothing the child with your body. And then you whisper either verbally or non-verbally, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And I think what baptism does is remind us it's okay. Why is it okay? Because you're being held. And so the notion of being held is very, very central to me, to the notion of baptism. And like all sacraments, it's a cooperative venture. So that scripture, come to me all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. I think the unstated part of the piece is if God is calling you to God and then says, I will relieve you of your burden, I think the way God would do that would be to invite you to lay your burden down and then to hold you. If you choose not to lay your burden down, then the embrace is compromised. You know what I'm saying? I mean, can you imagine embracing someone who has a backpack in front of them? It's just not satisfying for all parties concerned. And so I think we leave opportunities to be baptized, not baptized, because we were uncomfortable allowing God to hold us, which is what God desires to do, I think. So being held is central. There's one other thing that I think it exhilarates me to think that we would introduce this idea of baptism so passionately that we could invite people to think of baptism as their primal identity. So when people say, who are you? We don't say, I'm a teacher, I'm a priest living in the largest house in Inverness, I'm whatever I am.
Going on retreat.
Retreat, yeah.
Yeah. We say...
Again.
So who are you? I'm baptized.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the roar, if you get the who right, all the whats will take care of themselves. Yeah. And I joke about this, and actually, Laura gave me this gift, which would be one of my sacramentals, one of the physical things that bears grace, because I tease about it. I'm like, I'm not big on business cards, because usually you put your email and stuff, and then people would expect that I'd get back to them, and so that's not going to go well. So I don't carry business cards. But if I were going to have a business card, it would simply say, Terry Nelson Johnson, baptized.
Baptized.
And then if you're on a plane with somebody, and you just happen to be sitting next to the CEO of Lufthansa, and you're on a plane and they give you the card, you're supposed to be impressed. But whatever they are, you've trumped them, no pun intended, by handing them your card, which says,
Baptized.
Terry Nelson Johnson, baptized. It's who I am. And that's we start this pilgrimage by remembering that the only way we're going to complete the pilgrimage is by commencing it deeply rooted in our primary identity, which is to know ourselves as held and drenched in the love of God.
About a mile from 5245 Leona Drive was Phillips Swimming Pool.
That's
We
where you were
back in
little,
your
the little
hometown?
house and the little
Yeah.
house.
on the little
Cincinnati-
lawn.
Cincinnati,
We remember
You
that
get your
correctly.
big brother Mark
But with-
under the
but-
stars.
Yeah, Mark's part of this story too.
Oh,
That's interesting.
Oh, we need Mark to come join us
We
one
do,
day
we do.
because I want to hear his side.
Phillips Swimming Pool was the largest body of water that I can first remember seeing. This pool was huge. It had a cement island in the middle of it.
It reminds me of the cement pool on the Beverly Hills.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I had to go there.
This is huge. And diving boards. And the experience of Phillips Swimming Pool is so rich to me. And so when you say portal and when we talk about water and we talk about all these other things, I'm just more and more amazed with this story in my life in this place. I just passed by it. I was in Cincinnati about 2 weeks ago. So we would go to Phillips Swimming Pool. You had the turnstiles. My mom, the nurse, made us wear T-shirts, and nobody else wore T-shirts. She was trying to protect us from the sun. I hated that. Phillips Swimming Pool was gigantic. It had the cement island, and adjacent to Phillips Swimming Pool was a picnic area, and they throughout the whole place they played music, rock and roll music. The first time that I remember hearing rock and roll music was at Phillips Swimming Pool.
Formational.
So I'm walking into this experience with my mom and my older brothers
And your T-shirt.
and my T-shirt, and walking into the locker room, and it was sweaty and cold.
I can smell it.
And there were grown men changing their clothes, and I'm like, yeah, it was, so that was kind of weird.
Disconcerting.
People I didn't even know. And then I go out into Phillips Swimming Pool, and there's all these people. And there were layers of people. There was like, Greg Held lives across the street. There's a kid that lives down the block. I'm not sure of his name. There's a kid that is in my class, and I know his name, but I really don't know him. So all around this body of water of Phillips Swimming Pool are these people with layers of expanding my world. It's like I felt like I saw the whole world at Phillips Swimming Pool. Rock and roll music is playing. Mrs. Phillips did the announcements. She was up in the office.
They probably couldn't see her either.
Mrs. Phillips had polio. And she was a total mystery because it was like, Mrs. Phillips has polio. Yeah, okay. And then you got, 5 cent Milky Ways are 5 cents at the snack bar. All the kids. So this is big. Mrs. Phillips is making these announcements, and she sounded like whatever somebody who doesn't have polio sounds like. So, okay. So you got the rock and roll music, you got people, you got this body of water, you got the mystery of people, you got the weirdness of the locker room. And I had a bad experience at Phillips with a bunch of kids. They were like dunking me. And to this day, I have a little fear of water because of that. Mm. So there's this fear element.
Yes.
And then one day, my brother Jack said, let's go up and see Mrs. Phillips. So we walk up the stairs, we look into the office, and I just remember her she was in a wheelchair, and her fingers were something like I'd never seen before in my life. But she's like I am with this microphone making the announcements.
So her hands are clenched.
They're deformed.
Yeah.
And she was this small little woman, and it was like the mystery of Mrs. Phillips was like, wow, you know. So when I think about that experience, and then Mark went one day to Phillips with the Cardins down the street, and he was climbing up on the cement island, and he slipped and chipped his tooth. And that was a huge thing. Mrs. Carden came home so apologetic to my mom. Here's Mark with a piece of his tooth missing, you know. So there's danger, there's mystery, there's rock and roll, there's the fragileness of life, there's the cold floor, there's the element of water being kind of scary to me. And I think I mentioned this one time at Beloved. The baptismal font, regardless if it's this big or if it's our 4-foot thing or if it's the Jordan River, it's not a hot tub. It's not a wading pool. It's not a backyard above ground pool. It's not a backyard nice pool. It's not a lap pool. It's not a country club pool. The baptismal font and the experience of being drenched in baptism is like Philip's swimming pool that just opens us up to all kinds of mystery and joy and celebration all in one. But somehow the body of water collects all this, or it is at least a element, perhaps the most important element of it. So that's my long story about Philip's swimming. So.
Wow. It's so complicated sometimes. Our stories can be so complex, and over time, as we keep retrieving them, we find new layers and new wisdoms. And I imagine your story has morphed over the years as you've added in.
It has.
Memories and...
Based on things that I have remembered that actually in an interesting sort of way, baptism helped me. Like, I tell that story sometimes not as in the detail that I've told it right now when I do baptisms. Because I want to say to people, this font is like Philip's swimming pool. So I somewhat edit the story.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I love that you use the word danger, because I don't attend to that much when I talk about baptism verbally, but I think there's something so rich in it, because I think the danger is that we're being asked to relinquish our identity as non-loved. That part of us has to drown.
Yeah.
And so we're willingly participating in the losing part of ourselves, the part of ourselves that doesn't know ourselves as beloved and baptized. Yeah. And I think that's dangerous, because like we know ourselves like this, and I've lived like this, and I can navigate the world like this. What would it be like to, I shall make all things new? And so I think there's an element of, I think that's where the element of danger comes in of baptism, is are you willing to relinquish the elements of your person and your personality and your consciousness that cling to knowing yourself as something other than radically loved, which is really, really, really powerful.
Well, it's like Mary Kelly said yesterday, too. You know, you do have to relinquish to the water and trust that the water will hold you.
Yeah.
And that is most often requires someone else to help you believe it.
Yeah.
Right? You can't do baptism alone.
No.
And that is part of what baptism means to me, is it's about community. It's about being engaged with another and together trusting that it's bigger than us.
And I think the other thing is that this is all constantly moving. that like I can wake up pretty baptized. By 11:15, not so much. Yeah. Like, when they say on the L platform, like, are you saved? I'm like, I was yesterday. And then they want to like push you on it. But no, really, I knew myself as baptized at 9:15, and then I got the phone call.
Yeah.
And then I had the meeting. And then I did a presentation that didn't go as well as I wanted it to. And somehow that shakes my confidence that this is who I am. And so there's an element of renewal. We do this. We do so much of this ritually without, and I had the experience but missed the meaning. Yeah, I went to 2 masses this year where we renewed our baptismal identity. I'm like, yeah, did you though?
Yeah.
When they sprinkled that water, did you? And when you woke up at 9 and then you lost your baptism, lost your connection to your baptism by 11:15, did you renew your baptism? It's a verb. We have to, and that's why in order to receive all the grace and sacramentality that God wants to offer us, we have to continually come back to the water. And that's why that gesture that we make of blessing ourselves in the baptismal water as we enter a church community is so powerful. It's like, oh yeah, I'm free to feast because I'm loved. I'm free to be anointed because I'm loved. I'm free to welcome all this sacramentality because I'm loved. It's like the ticket. The baptismal identity is like the ticket to the freedom to participate in all of this. And there's a deep correlation between freedom and baptism, which just sort of gets me to tell the story that Joshua was reminding me of. A good friend of mine's a Episcopal priest, a female Episcopal priest, and she was at a parish, and the parish was deciding whether they were going to be an open and welcoming community. And what that was code for, is this going to be a place where people on the margins feel comfortable coming, particularly, gay and lesbian and all those letters thing. Yeah. And this was early on in this. And so my thing is like, at least they had the guts to have the conversation. Sure. We sing all are welcome, but I'm not sure that that's people's experience. So they had like little coffee fellowship after masses, and they had representatives from these marginal communities to sort of say like, well, if you decide to be an open and welcoming community, this is who you're welcoming. And it had to be awkward, like, it was almost like the zoo, like, come up and show us yourself as a marginalized person. So there's this gay man who was invited to do it. He's like, okay, I'll do it. And then it is totally awkward. So he started talking, nobody's asking questions, they're all being polite, and eating like one bite of donut. And he's like, well, I don't know if I would come here if you were to welcome me. But I think the point is that you want to know who you're welcoming, so I'll just tell you. The only thing you need to know about me, all of what I'm about to say is parenthetical. And then he gave a little bit of his resume. I graduated from here. I participated in this. My interests are in skiing and athletics, and I have degrees from, and I've been pretty successful in the business realm. And then gave his like business resume. And by the time he finished, you're like, oh, this guy's a player. And he referenced corporations and what he was doing now in such a way that anybody mildly sophisticated would know, like, oh, okay. It says, if you walked into my office, you would see none of the traditional accoutrements. You wouldn't see any of my framed degrees. You wouldn't see pictures of my ski trips or of my family. Actually, there's nothing in my office except one framed item. And it sits in back of me on the wall, in back of my desk. And I just know it's there. And it grounds me. And also, it proclaims to anybody that comes into my office, like, okay, this is who I am. And so the only thing you need to know about me is that the one framed item in my office is my baptismal certificate. So that's who I am, and if you choose to welcome me, that's who you'll be welcoming. Someone who deeply knows themselves as baptized. Anyway, thanks for the donuts. It's been great. Wow.
Holy cow.
I thought, I just wanted to have the guts to do that. Like, I love art. I have my office, all of my pictures, and people ask about them. And I have my Campion Jesuit High School state champion wrestler, blah, blah, blah. All my sacramental art, which I love. But there's a part of me is like, no, what if I just allowed myself to declare to the world, this is who I am. And the guy's a businessman, whoa. And I think that's what we're asking at the beginning of this pilgrimage. Like, don't bring any identification. Don't bring your insurance card. Maybe don't bring your cell phone. Just bring your baptismal certificate. That's what's going to be our ultimate map. Sort of the topographical map for our pilgrimage will be our baptismal certificates, which will then open us to all the grace that awaits during this time together.
Portal. You've mentioned this descriptive word of portal. Obviously, the Eucharist is different, so to speak, more important than every other sacrament. I don't know if you can say that, but it is in a category by itself. What you're opening me up to is, each one of them is in a category by itself. But just think about baptism. Through the gift of our church, we renew our baptismal promises during Easter. We renew our baptismal promises at every baptism we attend, right? Periodically, people renew their marriage vows. Once a year, as priests, we're supposed to do, on Holy Thursday, it's a day which I've never felt real comfortable with. Like, okay, the priests are going to renew their commitment. It's important. But think about every one of the sacraments or all kinds of things in our lives that we have to renew and repeat. But think about the basic elements of bathing every day.
That's good.
Going to Philip's swimming pool over and over and hearing a new rock and roll song and meeting even more people.
That's good.
Of the adventures of every one of our careers, our work, that they can be so. Every day can be a new day, obviously, but there again, even the ebbs and flows of the tides of the ocean, right? There's something about water that is so primal, and there's so many different. I talked about the Pacific Ocean before, but
yeah.
So perhaps again the Eucharist with bread and wine, but perhaps there's no other element like water that associates and animates this experience of life that is of baptism. And that reminds me actually of a story when you focus too much on water. Talk about an ebb and a flow. It's a story of a young priest that went to Guatemala, and he was like apprenticing with this older priest. And the older priest was an alcoholic, was a curmudgeon, and the young kid had hoped that this older priest would mentor him a little more, but he was just this sour guy, So the young priest gets invited to go on the radio to talk about baptism. So he goes on the radio, and he proceeds to talk about water for 45 minutes. He comes back home, and he says to the curmudgeon old priest, "What'd you think?" Priest goes, "Baptism doesn't have anything to do with water. It has to do with people in our community, many of whom won't live to be 20 years of age, and godparents that are willing to help the parents that probably won't make it very long either. Water is so secondary. It's about a commitment of faith. It's not about water, So and the kids get like,
Drats.
So as much as I've been talking about how prime water, I love to tell that story because it kind of gets you off of water and the other elements that are just so significant to and add to the richness of the sacrament.
You know, in getting ready for this adventure, this pilgrimage, I found this book, it was Pope Benedict, who some of his early homilies, and one of the things he said about baptism is that baptism, especially in the Catholic tradition, where so often we're talking about infants, is about someone giving you their faith until you can claim it as your own. And that gift, you know, it's, I want you to have something that's precious to me.
Yeah.
It's what every parent does. It's what every grandmother that's baptizing a baby in the kitchen sink right now.
Yes.
That's what she's doing.
That's right. That's right.
And that piece of baptism is like, here, have a piece of me. Have a piece of my heart.
Yeah.
Have a piece of what has held me together or been my lifeline. And what Pope Benedict goes on to say is then confirmation becomes that place where you say, that faith that you lent me, now it's mine.
That's
too.
good.
Yep.
So I thought that was really so simple and so beautiful.
Yeah. You reminded me too that was another thing that the old curmudgeon priest said. It's about starting somebody on a journey and other people helping them. I mean, so in a sense, pilgrimage, exactly.
Yeah. No one swims alone at Philip's Pool.
No, nobody swims alone. That's exactly right. It's just everybody. Here comes everybody. It's Catholicism in itself, you know. So,
should I confess to Father Terry, who matriculated at Mundelein Seminary, that I did
Go ahead.
steal
Yeah.
the sign in the pre-swimming pool, no one swims alone, in order to use it as a visual aid for the blood retreat.
Nice.
So
no one swims alone.
when are
That's
we
good.
going to get to the confession part, Father Terry?
And can I just
That's
do a
coming
shout
up.
out to Patty O'Kelly, because at some point she is going to hear this podcast from Ireland and say, I think I was the one that said that, Terry. No one swims alone.
That's right.
Well, I want to
Is
give
it-
Mary Kelly a shout out because I'm just collecting more and more baptismal homilies. When I do baptisms, I just love, you know, there's so many, but her image, it really spoke to me because of my fear,
Yes.
that little fear that I have of water. And just the way she described that, it's that lack of trust that the water will hold you, right? Isn't that what she said?
Yes.
You can float, and that's what her dad taught her, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The lifeguards for life.
Yeah.
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 You know, I thought of speaking out of like two sides of my mouth, that piece I started with Ian and Quinn Carey.
Yeah.
I don't want to retract it, but I want to recontextualize it. And when I was a little, like young theologian, and I would meet grandparents who were distressed over their grandchild not being baptized because the parents had fallen away, and their distress, I was compassionate towards their distress, but part of me was like, oh, come on. Like, the kid is loved. He's 6 months old. There's nothing. And so I would be somewhat dismissive. Now, when I meet someone, and there's a lot of things I don't do well, but I'm intuitive, and so when I'm with someone, if you imagine baptism on a 0 to 10 sort of scale, 10 being someone who knows themselves as radically, mysteriously loved, and 0 someone for whom that notion is complete anathema.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's anywhere below 5, I just feel this trepidation on their behalf.
Yeah.
When you're with
Yeah.
someone who doesn't know themselves as loved,
It's loved.
I just feel like we got to get you to the water, dude.
Yeah.
It's not healthy to traverse the earth,
No.
not knowing yourself as loved.
No.
And I'm just a whole dinner with someone under those circumstances. I just feel this deep urgency. And so the young theologian has now, as a 65-year-old dude, is like, oh yeah, they were onto something. Like, baptism is crucial.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the ritual as we know it, although that's a manifestation and a celebration, but the actual felt experience is critical. The other thing I was thinking about with respect to our pilgrimage and baptism is I first thought of the word valet, and I think, and I'm so convinced of this, that our capacity to welcome all the sacraments that we will celebrate during our pilgrimage, I think, is contingent on baptism.
Yeah.
To know yourself as I should be the target of a feast, I can participate in the feast, is contingent on knowing yourself as loved.
Yeah.
I can come to know myself as capable and affirmed is contingent on knowing yourself as loved.
Yes.
The fact that I can receive mercy for both mistakes and cruelty that I authored or was the victim of is contingent on knowing ourselves as loved. So I was sort of thinking that when we go on this pilgrimage in search of all this sacramentality, we need a valet guy that's just following us around with like a bowl of water. And this is a little bit of a side, but those guys out there, I know you'll remember this. Remember when you did the joke at the sleepover? You shook the guy's hand and you put it in the water. You know what I'm saying? At the sleepover? That's what I'm saying. That's not what I'm talking about.
But
the
I'm girls didn't do that.
Before,
Just kidding.
Before we get to another pilgrimage site, you just need to have the valet and then they come and you just put your hand in the water to remind yourself, oh, I'm worthy of this feast.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm worthy of mercy. Oh. And so the water frees us to welcome all these sacraments. But maybe valet, which gives you the impression of like a guy in a tux or something, is not the best image for a pilgrimage. So like a Sherpa. I think we need like a baptismal Sherpa to follow us throughout all of our pilgrimage with the bowl of water. Like, hey, we're coming up to mercy. Yeah. Put your hand in the water. Yeah. Yep. And I think that's why traditionally we have the baptismal font at the entry of the church, so that all the sacraments that await us. And I have so much regard for the boldness of your font. Yeah. It doesn't lend itself to that same deal. I just think there's something simple about I'm coming here to welcome the sacrament of forgiveness, and this will be costly. Yeah. Before I do that, I'm going to take my hand, dip it in this baptismal font, and remind myself of my fundamental lived experience of being loved by the mystery of God. Mm. Okay, go and say, I need mercy so badly. Yeah. I'm so hungry for a feast. This commitment needs to be blessed, whatever it is. There's something really...
I need to be affirmed. I need to affirm somebody else. Yeah. I'm in need of healing. Yeah.
Terry, so many people during the pandemic talked about being away from church and the pain of not receiving the Eucharist. And for me, so much of Eucharist is the communion. You can tell I've got this community thing. That's a big part of my spirituality. Sure. But when I did go to Mass during the pandemic with my mask on, having sanitized myself and checked the temperature and everything, what upset me the most was the empty holy water font.
Wow.
And when I arrived at the back of the church and that font was empty, I burst into tears. Mm. Wow. And I thought, okay, well, here's some water. And guess what? It's rolling down my face.
Cheeks.
And it is holy.
Yeah.
But I was, you use the word ambushed a lot. I was ambushed by that moment. I had no idea how much the water meant to me.
Meant to you.
And Kira was standing there, and she said, Laura, it's happened to a lot of people. These empty holy water fonts are really difficult.
Yeah.
That's really good.
That reminds me of several things, but architecturally, a lot of older church, the baptistry was not a part of the main part of the church. You weren't part of the you weren't on the team until you got baptized. So architecturally, that's how it was.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So then it moved to the fonts in the back of the church, which we have. Ours are pretty small, And then we made a radical statement here to put the font in the center. So I remind people of that all the time. Our baptism is so central to who we are. Architecturally, that is expressed in our church. So I showed you guys the picture last night of the ring.
Yeah.
So I love to do this just the way I do weddings. I take the rings from the best man or maid of honor, and I encourage them, a maid of honor, to have one as well as the best man, which flusters a lot of people. But sometimes I say, okay, so I take the rings, I hold them up, I talk about what a powerful symbol, and I start walking down the aisle towards the baptismal font, and people are like,
He's running away with my rings.
Yeah.
He's going on vacation.
This is how he gets to the sabbaticals.
I am holding up the rings and talking about what they are, and then I dip them in those fonts.
That's good.
So for a number of reasons during COVID, it was so sterile during COVID. The groom had to walk up, put the rings in this little bowl, and then I added a really nice, okay, let's all extend our hands and bless these rings. But then the groom would go over, pick up. That's how sterile the COVID thing was. The first wedding that I did with the water back in, I start walking towards the font, and I just broke down. It was like, God, it was so rich. I mean, talk about being ambushed, but it just reminds you how important this is, how significant this thing is. And again, I keep playing this heave and ho with water, how important it is. And then the priest in Guatemala says that water is only secondary. It's amazing, isn't it? And I go back to what we talked about with ritual, how important ritual is for us and how we integrate water into our rituals.
Yeah.
And so
Also reminds me, that, well, two things.
and the
One
water
is
that I have right now.
we're 25 minutes over,
I
which
know.
sort of fascinates me. Like, oh yeah, we'll wrap up. Let's go on to confirmation. Maybe by 5 o'clock we're gonna get to funerals and stuff. But I think one of the deep sadnesses in me is that we've sort of punized our sacraments.
I know you've said that before, and I
our-
love that when you say
the
that.
ritual
Yeah.
manifestation of our
Yeah.
sacraments.
Yeah.
Like, part of the reason they have power is something that La said previously, was that they're supposed to cost us. I mean, if you decide to get up and do the ritual, there should be some kind of like, this is asking something of me.
Right.
And we've sort of flattened that out, like, well, it's this pew, everybody's expected to go.
Right.
And we got to get the parking lot clear by 11:15, so get to your dot, take a left.
Yeah.
And we don't give people time to discern, like, am I going to do this? And previously, the people that didn't go, you figured they're not in a state of grace, so they turned to the side. As my
Right.
dad was one of those, you know.
Right.
And it shouldn't. That's not the pause. The pause is like, can I accept this grace and then cooperate with it? So I think our rituals, we need to like put bite back into them, but also we need to put texture back into them. So we've taken bread and made it a wafer, and
Right.
I believe in the real presence, which we'll get to, in the most radical way. But it's a little harder to believe for me. It's easier for me to believe in the real presence than that's bread. You know what I'm saying? Because it doesn't look like bread. It doesn't taste like bread.
Yeah.
There's nothing like you're telling me that's bread. Like, I believe in God, but not that that's bread, baby. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on. And so we've made it all. It's all like economy based, and it's built to not make a mess. Like if we just little water, little oil, little wafer. And the point of sacramentality is texture and the power of the incarnation. Like the sound of water, the water being poured. And so you come out of the baptismal font drenched as you guys do here. And we have bread that you break and you smell, and there's crumbs.
Absolutely.
And there's oil that you sort of massage into someone's palms.
Yes.
Oh, God, it's so powerful. And we wonder why our ritual sacraments don't have a lot of power. Like, first of all, you're not asking enough of people to participate, not just money or their guilt, but their actual, like, oh, am I willing to become what I eat?
Yeah.
Like, just sit in a pew until you're in a position to imperfectly answer that, I'm, as best I can, I will become what I eat.
Yeah.
Will I release my own shame and not identify with it in the same way? Okay, well then, reconcile and just tell somebody that, and
Yeah.
they're not going to faint or throw up, and then you realize, oh my gosh, like wow, it's amazing.
Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
Amazing grace.
Amazing grace, baby.
And Mary wasn't the other one full of grace. So, hail.
Yeah, here.
I don't want this to go by without acknowledging the fact that I feel like I have been baptized into the experience of a bumblebee and 2 wasps the entire time we've been talking. A small wasp, and obviously now that I'm pointing it out, the bumblebee is gone. But I want to use the word baptism in a little different way to say I feel like it's overcome my fear. I've been baptized into a kind of a camaraderie with this bumblebee who has been so busy here, but oblivious to us, but us not oblivious to the great experience of
And
nature right there.
I'm just so grateful that you copped to that little bit of fear of water.
Yeah.
I think it's scary to, when someone looks at you with a kind of love that you're pretty confident you don't deserve, and you almost want to look away, or you almost want to say, like, screw you,
Yeah.
which seems like a perverted response to being loved, but I think we're scared to be loved. Like, if you only knew. So this morning I came in like, yesterday I was so excited. It's been 2 years of anticipation. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think I messed that up.
No.
Like, no, dude, you're loved. Even if you mess it up, you're loved. Like, I think it's scary to be loved. So that fear of water is so appropriate. Like, will the water hold me? Is it actually possible that I'm loved? And it's one thing to be loved, like most 6-months-old avail themselves to being held pretty naturally.
Yeah.
But 16-year-olds, 26-year-olds, 36-year-olds who were held once and it didn't go that well, 50-year-olds who say, like, the way I hold is not really apparently the way you're supposed to hold, or anyway, I just think it costs us a lot to render ourselves available to a God that wants to rebaptize us over and over and over again, so that God might do what God wants to do, which is to take us on this pilgrimage and lavish us with abounding grace in all these different facets of our life.
The Gospel of John, and then the 4th chapter of the first letter of John. The most important thing is not that we love God, it's that God loves us, and God loved us first. And when we're talking about how primal baptism is, I think that's one of the greatest connections right there.
Yeah.
God, we were baptized first. We were immersed into this whole creative, sacred experience first.
Yeah.
And it all comes from that. Yeah.
And that there's no way a 2-month-old can earn baptism.
No.
Like, they don't even know they're supposed to be documented. Or have passed any tests, or not done anything too bad, sin. We'll get to. Well, let's not go there. Let's not go. We should talk about original sin and baptism at some point, but not right now.
But not right now.
I gotta be.
When people say, "Well, why baptize this baby?" They don't. I say, "Did you remember when you learned how to walk?" People go, "No." So, same thing happened to you that happened to me. I had one brother pushing me and the other one going, and the instinct to walk was within me. It's within all of us.
Yeah, that's good.
So I dawned into consciousness knowing I could walk. But they played a part in that.
Yeah.
So again, like the creative part of water at the beginning, we dawn into consciousness knowing we're baptized. And having to be reminded of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
The other thing we didn't say about baptism, but I think is critical, is that every new baptism reinvigorates the community of witnesses, right?
Yeah.
And every time you see someone being baptized, you're hard pressed if you really available to it, if you're really watching, you're hard pressed not to take it in and think, there's more hope. There's a little more hope.
Yeah. And we can get this in next time too, but one of the most beautiful stories about baptism, which I rarely tell, is my best friend Ed Gimmerchek worked with the AIDS population in New York when it was in its zenith and terrifying and, ostracized. And so he walked with some guy to the doctor, and the doctor gave the kind of like, it would be good if you got your affairs in order.
Yeah.
And then, and Ed was a social worker and a theologian, so he walks back with the guy, and the guy happens to say, and he knows Ed's religiously inclined, and he says, I've never been baptized. And it's a fascinating time to bring it up, because now he's just been told that
He doesn't have much
his
time.
days are numbered. And Ed just sort of lets it, doesn't like try to fix it or say, we'll take care of that. Or they walk a couple blocks in silence. And it's in New York, it's in the summer, and it's like crazy hot. And they've opened up the fire hydrants. And it's at night. And so Ed's like, would you like to celebrate your baptism? And the guy looks at the fire hydrant and just like, so Ed goes and kneels down, takes the guy, and the guy just like faces the fire hydrant. And Ed's in back of him and just holding him, and he's doing this prayer. And Ed's just an organic theologian, so he prays about receiving this refreshment and cleansing. And, wow.
Yeah.
And the point of the story with all of these sacraments is that we're supposed to become the minister of the sacraments that we receive.
Yeah.
And so this is not Father Terry's. Father Terry does not want, is capable of having the market cornered
No.
on being
No.
the minister. And that's why the mediation piece is so important.
Absolutely.
Like, so and then we can turn that phrase around of, I mediated the sacrament of such and such to so-and-so,
so-and-so.
or to the world.
Yeah.
Like, oh, wow. And that's going to be a leap of, but also a critical one, which gets us to justice and mercy. And what about the killings in the streets of Chicago and our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan?
Well, and it starts at that place of worthy, right? That's
Yeah, well, who am I to baptize?
Yeah.
I'll get him over to Father Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who am I?
And the priest saying, well, you got to do prep.
Yeah. Or we don't have any time right now
Yeah, right.
to get you on the schedule.